quick review, let's go over some of the stuff in the second half of chapter 2 in our speech to print textbook. So, at the beginning of chapter 2, we talked about the phonological processing and how that worked with the developmental stages of reading what the brain is telling us. And we've been working a lot with that, with the phonological awareness, building into like a focus on a specific sound, that phonemic focus, all doing that orally, and then taking that phonemic focus and connecting it to the letter pattern or the grapheme connections through encoding and through that word building with the rules and the articulation, and then moving that into blending and decoding. So now let's take a little deeper look at those consonants and those vowels. So as we're looking at the articulation, we can understand why certain things happen with those students as they're trying to segment those words and why some of those errors occur in that processing. So let's dive into consonants. First of all, when you hear the word consonant, what do you think about? What are they? When you're explaining them to students and helping them decide if some of a letter is a consonant or a vowel, do you start with a consonant sound as opposed to a consonant letter? So because we know everything starts with the phonological part, let's look at consonants from the viewpoint of a sound. That these are speech sounds that are formed when we restrict or obstruct the flow of air and the sound some way. We're either going to use our lips, our teeth, or our tongue. We're going to alter the sound and alter that airflow so that it creates a consonant. Now, the cool thing about consonants is that when you have your airflow and coming out and you've started the consonant, there is very little movement within that sound. There might be a very slight amount, especially in glides, but all the other consonants really are fixed. They stay through the whole duration of the sound. And we'll take a look at that as we look at each type of consonant. So the other piece with consonants is that we know there are some that are voiced and some that are unvoiced. The same sound may be articulated in the same location, or sorry, different sounds in the same location, but they will be a completely different phoneme because one, we're using our vocal cords and one we are not. So this idea of being voiced and unvoiced is unique to consonants. Vowels are always voiced. So take a look at the mouth. We know if consonants are going to obstruct the airflow by using the tongue, the teeth, and the lips, then we're going to be looking here as how are our lips being used? How are they connecting with what our tongue is doing? What are our teeth doing? And where is the sound being produced? Is it having to flow past the hard palate? Is it coming deep within the throat from the vocal cords? Is it resonating back here in the back of our mouth? Or is it resonating up here in our nasal cavity? Is it an unvoiced sound that is created by friction up with our tongue and our teeth or our lips? Or is it a stop that has a kind of impact moment by our teeth or at the top of our mouth? All of those pieces help us to distinguish consonants from each other. So let's start with stops. A stop is when the airflow is completely stopped. We are going to cease to make the sound. Now, we may start the method of articulation in different places, but we know the sound will stop, and they're very short sounds. The unique thing about these stops is that they will go right into the next sound so quickly in articulation when we're co-articulating because they are such a short sound and we have disrupted the airflow. Oftentimes, stops are confusing for students in blends because we pop right over to that next sound. For example, bull in black. You still can hear the b, b, b in the front, but it goes right into that ul in co-articulation because of the nature of it being a stop. Now, when you're looking at trying to say the b, b, or the t, or the d, this is one another reason why a lot of phonics programs end up saying buh or duh because it's really hard to isolate just that b, 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 b without having that next vowel sound onto it. So next we have a liquid. A liquid doesn't really have a start or an end. The funny thing about liquids, these are uls and we do start the sound, of course, but they don't have such a beginning like stops do. Compare them to stops, as in b, p. Those have a very distinct start or stop. The liquid does not. It alters that airflow. It's very vowel-like so that it carries the vowel with it in the syllable. If we have things like table and smarter, those are controlled vowels. Those uls, they take the vowel with them and they really sound vowel-like. So the way that linguists tend to look at liquids is that you have certain sounds that will move the sound into the nasal cavity, which are very much like liquids. They don't have the definite start and stop. And then you have things like the glides that have almost to the moment of impact. Think of a stop and we're almost to the stop. Or they have a definite point where you can hear some impact, but it goes kind of away. Liquids are in between. They're not resonating in the nasal cavity and they don't have almost to a point of impact. That's why they sound very vowel-like and why they carry the vowel. Now the ul and the are formed here in the middle of the mouth with the tongue rising up to the ridge and the hard palate, the alveolar ridge and the hard palate, and they're twisting the airflow around what the tongue is doing and changing our sound. Next, we have glides. Glides, again, they sound very vowel-like as well, but there's a little movement. Back up here where I said there are little to no movement in consonants, all of the stops in liquids don't have any movement at their sound. Even with the b, even though your mouth opens, you still have that b right there where your lips are together popping. That sound is just that b. We always have a slight and open our mouth to the because it's so hard to get that b by itself. You can kind of hear it when you put it in a blend, like black. You have that quick b there. It's so hard to say, I know, right into the ul. The glide has that, but then it has a little bit of movement. Say y, w. You have a little bit of a start or that place of impact, but then you have a movement where your mouth drops open a little bit. That's why they are very vowel-like, and some of them can turn into vowels, as we know with y. Now, they can be a syllable boundary because they are almost a semi-vowel, but they don't have to be. Next comes the nasals. The nasals are distinguished because they resonate in that naval cavity, and if you hold your nose, you cannot say them. So it's kind of fun to teach students that saying, let's say n or and hold your nose. Can you still say it? Nope. That's because the sound and the air is coming in our nose and the air comes out our nose. These sounds, like liquids, kind of will take over the vowel. Now, the nasals will alter the vowel sound because of the way we resonate and move into the nasal cavity. We're changing where the airflow goes. So the vowels will then alter from their pure form and become whiny. A really fun way to say that for kids is that they become whiny. You have I becomes in, ah becomes ah. They get a little bit on the whiny side because you're moving the airflow and the sound from inside the mouth where the vowel is formed up into the nasal cavity. Now, fricatives are those that cause friction. I like this one because it makes a lot of sense with the name. They're created as you are forcing air through a narrow space and creating vibrations. You can feel the vibrations with the air for the F sound is you can feel it pushing through your teeth and your lips. To put on your voice, you can feel the vibrations of the v on your lips. I always laugh because Chinese people really don't have fricatives in their language at all, and they don't really like them. The students had a really hard time with th and th. They didn't like the way that their tongue wiggled between their teeth on that th sound. Last isn't a fricative. There are actually only two consonants or two phonemes that we count as affricatives. This is where you have starting with a stop and then you have just an immediate release of air with friction in it. So you have your combination of a stop and a fricative as an affricative. So think of j, j, and ch, ch, ch. Those are the only two affricatives where you have a stop that's air stopped completely, but you've had a stop with friction. So What's important for students is to know the manner of articulation, what we're using, our teeth, our tongue, our lips, what our air is doing, and what type of sound it is. Are we trying to stop the sound completely, or is it going to resonate up in our nose? Are we creating some friction or part of a friction with a stop? Are we just letting the sound go without a beginning and end and not really having a start or stop? Or do we have a beginning and then it flows into a vowel? Those kind of things can help distinguish between the consonants, help them to isolate those in those phonological segmentations, and help us to attach the right letter to what's happening in their mouth. Now we've got them listed on the side here on a sound wall. We have the manner of articulation up here at the top, and then we've listed the sounds inside the boxes. We do this to help students have a reference for what's happening in their mouth. If we're paying attention to what their mouth is doing, we make that connection to what letter that is, then you're going to see I can look at my mouth and I know what letter it goes with that voice and voice, and I know that it's a quick sound, or I know that it has vibration, or I know that it's really no start, no stop, or it has a start and end. Those kind of things help the students to attend those layers of, all right, I know exactly what sound I'm dealing with. I can now attach the grapheme to it. So looking at our practice, we want to find the phoneme for the first and last consonant sound. We want to make sure we can distinguish those consonant sounds. So as you took a look at the practice, you should be able to pull out these sounds from each one of these words and find, oh, okay, this is sh. O is our vowel. Ol is the last consonant. It's sometimes tricky with some of these consonant digraphs, like the silent W still makes the Those are where patterns come in. I'm like, okay, this is a grapheme pattern for that we're using it for that sound. So I'm just going to flip through those really quick and let you kind of take a look. There might be some discussion or debate on the word quest. Right now, there is some debate about that Q. Now, we in English never have the letter Q used without a U. They do, however, use just a Q in other languages like French, where they might have Jacques or quiche. Now, if you use some of those in French, the Q makes the K sound. In English, since we English-based words, we don't ever leave it by itself, we tend to represent QU as k, w, k, w. So this one was always up for debate about whether you're going to write k, w, kwa for your first initial sound or just the k like you would have for some French stuff. I know it's confusing. So then, taking a look, if we can identify the consonant phonemes, we should be able to identify the vowel phonemes as well. So the third phoneme in these words, with choose, you have ch, u, s, choose. Now, you can also have that as a z on certain dialects, can make it z. Pneumonia, n, u, would be our consonant, our third phoneme. This one's tricky because it's surrounded by two nasals. And remember, nasals take control over the sound. And so you might not always hear the oo, or you might even try to alternate into a u. So we have kitchen and writhe, vision, square, sink, and folk. Is just before that k sound. Here's a good example of the third phoneme is where that U pops in, and that U helps to create that W sound that we were talking about over here with the Q. Okay, so this is from exercise 1, counting out the phonemes, checking out where the phoneme is. The biggest hint I can give you on this is to go through each sound and kind of take away the visual. Don't look at the letters, but tell yourself, okay, it's ace. Close your eyes and go through each sound in ace. A, s. Okay, there's only 2. When you look at exit, we have e, k, s, it, t. And there's 5. This guy is an anomaly. X is actually 2 phonemes. It's the only case in English that we have one grapheme letter, and it's going to be used to represent 2 sounds. Always those 2 sounds. Those 2 sounds will never be split apart. A couple others, if you guys have a couple questions about some of the others, let me know. I'm going to move on to exercise 2, which is why those phonemes are elusive. So, does the phoneme t sound different or feel different or the same in these words? Listen carefully and see if you can pull out, is there a difference or are they the same? Let's start with the first one. Tag, stag, water, past. Now they're all t, but if you listen carefully, they are all a little different. And the reason is because in co-articulation, our mouth is going to prepare for the next sound or recover from the previous sound before we move into that t. So there will be some very small variations or slight changes from that sound as opposed to a pure t when we make the t in isolation. Some of these get worse depending on what's before it and what's after it. We will talk more about that in chapter 3 and chapter 4 when we look at allophone and allophonic variation. But be aware that even in words that have the pure t form in there, you're still going to have a little slight influence from what's before and what's after. Now, something big that we'll talk about later in chapter 3 is this idea of water. Now, in Idaho, you will have some people who will say water, and they will give that t into the You'll get a little bit of a ch almost to it. In other parts of the country, and in Idaho, I mean as well, you'll have this actually turn into a d sound. You'll have it turned into a voiced partner, which makes sense because A is voiced and is voiced. And so moving from a voice to an unvoiced to a voiced letter, your mouth is linguistically lazy and won't want to turn its voice off. So therefore you end up with a d, which is the voiced companion to t. It's articulated in the same place. And you end up with a word, instead of saying water, you have water, water. So that is something you'll hear in Idaho, and a lot of this will happen when you have voiced in front, voiced after that unvoiced sound. Other places are very, very articulate and will not do that, but in Idaho we do. Now, looking at K, same thing. Can you hear that same or different in cat, scat, pinky, and tack? Same sound, very slight differences. There's enough of a sound there that you know that it's going to be a k, k. But if you understand that there's a slight difference, that helps to explain why some students might make those errors and have some of those omitted. Some of the k might be gone in a blend because they can't hear it, or they might omit the N, pinky, or have something inserted. They might have a different letter in there because they think there might be something else there. It all comes down to that. Moving from one sound into the next into a co-articulation has some slight variance. Now, in our brain, what our brain will hardwire to do when we're speaking is that if you're saying a word and you're hearing these slight variations, you have hardwired in your brain to attach to sounds you're familiar with. Since we are hardwired for speech, your oral lexicon is huge. And so you will listen to someone and they'll have a variation, but it's close enough to what you already have in your lexicon that you will already adjust and accept that, yep, that's what they said. That's what they said, water. I can see and picture water in my head, even though they said water. The cool thing is in reading, we want to bring attention to those things and say, yeah, even though it sounds a little bit like duh, good job. I'm glad you heard that because that's kind of what's happening. This is why it's happening. And we want to remember the grapheme we're using for water is t. So even though you hear that in Idaho, we're going to focus on that. So you bring that attention, that builds up their lexicon to that. Sometimes you'll see that when they're trying to guess a word, and that's what they'll pull in what they're hearing. And they'll just guess at that point. So they get the first part of the word, they might get the first part of the pieces of the letters they know, and then they'll guess the rest of the word. It's because at that point their lexicon has hit its max as far as what the letters and what the letters that they know, and they're just pulling from whatever's left. So often when they just start a word and guess it, that's what that is. If they start to look at a word and they just guess it right off the bat and it's totally wrong, Again, it's because none of the beginning of those letters they can't recognize, they can't pull it from their lexicon. Now, looking down here at the next question is, does the mouth look or feel the same or different when you're looking at see and so? Again, it's back to that why they are elusive. It's moving from the next one. Dress and desk, you've got more of a j. Where your mouth is preparing to say the you've moved your articulation from the d up to and if you look at your mouth, it looks a lot like j, j. Same thing happens with trap. It comes into ch. Articulation's the same without the voiced. So you're going to see that happen a lot. Again, bring attention back to it. What do you think causes the mouth position to change? It's preparation for that next letter or that next sound, right? Now, this is the biggest question I have. It's like, what is the implications of this reality for teaching and learning of speech sounds? I'd love to have that conversation with you and have that discussion in person. So think about that. Think about what that means to your teaching, what that means to your instruction. If you know that those issues will make those vowels elusive. All right, so exercise 3 was identifying the third phoneme. So you had y, sorry, I'll start that again. Y, oo. You actually have a U sound here. Now, we typically think that it's just a long U, but there is a phoneme that we've attached as a U sound. Take a look at the vowel valley and you'll find and see if you can find the one that I'm talking about. Back over here we have walked, w, ah, k. There's our third one. Just some practice then counting out your phonemes. Okay, so now this is just a funny side note of why the IPA alphabet was created, that rationale for phonetic alphabet, and why we tend to start using that in later chapters is because what we've talked about before is that we don't have a phonetic one-to-one correspondence amongst our sounds. We have groups of letters and graphemes that can be used for a sound, and we can use multiple combinations. Cape, kick, cord, quit, axe, and teak are some examples of the k and what we do to those poor little kids with the k sound. So we have to some way communicate globally and across the board with so many variations, and that's why the phonetic alphabet was invented. Is that you have then one symbol for just the sound, and it is all phonetically connected, right? Now, if I looked at glad and you can sit there and put those phonetic sounds in there, you would be able to then have the correct sound and you would pronounce it correctly. It is like learning a whole different language. I've practiced with the IPA transcription and it looks kind of funny. The more you practice, though, the more you start looking at it, you're like, oh, yeah, I can totally read that. So have some fun, try it out. You don't have to do that. It's not necessarily for what we're doing, but it is kind of fun to play with it. Now, on exercise 5, we were looking at the distinct features of phonemes. So circling the ones that you can say continuously until you run out of breath. Hopefully you circled these ones. This is a fricative, so it's going to have a stop and friction, but it is going to stop. This is a stop, this is a stop, this is a stop, and that's an affricative. And as we know, as an affricative, it has a stopping point. It just includes friction. As far as which ones will resonate in the nasal cavity, hopefully you chose our nasals, which are our 3 nasals, ng, and n. Biggest difference between these two is I know they feel very much the same. The ng, the ng, comes back further in the throat before it resonates. And so you're producing the sound a little bit more back of the mouth, top of the throat string. This one is produced a little bit more forward. So it's distinguished as a separate sound. And then which ones are unvoiced without our vocal cords on? And I hope you circled these. We have no vocal cords on sh, k, p, t, and ch. But we have our vocal cords in play on all of those. Nice job, guys. Let's go on to vowels. So if you want to just watch a portion of the video, this is a good stopping point right here. So vowels, let's look at vowels. Vowels have this wonderful little progression as you move through the mouth. Vowels, we can talk to them about being short or laxed, or we can refer to them as being long versus tense. Now, this is kind of a personal preference thing. The words terms short and long were used in Middle English when the actual sound of the vowel was a little different. There's a huge linguistical evolution that happened between what we speak now and Middle English. I would love to go back and hear somebody speak Middle English and just kind of hear some of the differences because our language has evolved from them. Back then, the terms short and long had actual meaning. The way the sound was produced and created was short and long for those vowels. But we've evolved out of that. We can hold every vowel sound for any length of time. So these have no purpose anymore except we've used them for tradition. If you wanted to start using a more correct term, you might think of using the word lax and tense. Our typical long vowel sounds, our mouths are more tense. We have a little bit more um, tension in our lips or our tongue. And when we have the short vowels, the typical short vowels, our mouths are more lax. Our tongue might be a little bit more relaxed or a little less stretched out. Then again, it really doesn't have too much impact on the students. It's just a helpful way as using short and long to differentiate between the two sound groups. It hasn't shown to be detrimental in any way. Some kids might get stuck with the idea of, well, I can make that ah sound for a long time, so how come it's not a long sound? So if that occurs, then you might think about switching from lax and tense. So vowel sounds are speech sounds, but these guys are open and we're not going to obstruct them. There's going to be lots of movement in between these sounds. If you think about saying E, and where your tongue moves up, and your mouth opens, your tongue is dropping, or even oi has tons of movement. There can be lots of movement, but you are going to have some kind of movement within your vowels. The other cool thing about vowels is that we don't obstruct them. They are created with the where the tongue is in the mouth and the shape of the mouth. So the vowel we know in a syllable is the peak. The coda is everything after the vowel. So if we're looking at the word short, short has sh as its onset, ort is the rhyme. So we've split the word into two parts. Looking for the coda is just focusing on the rhyme. The or would be the peak, that's where the vowel is, and then anything after that sound after, that's the coda. Now, distinctive features, again, like we said, is determined by where the shape of the mouth and where the tongue is placed. We've got two different things to consider with the tongue at the same time. If it's front or back, if it's high or low. So if you want a vowel sound like the E sound here, you're going to be high and front. So let's take a look at that. We've got heed. Our tongue is going to be high toward the front. As we move down, our tongue's going to drop, but it's still here in the front of our mouth. So we have he, high front, hid is starting to drop front, head is dropping a little bit more still the front, and had. Had is still in the front of our mouth, but it's now down at the bottom, especially when you get to something like hod. Your mouth should be now wide open, your tongue is dropped, and you're going to start to move back. So if you notice, you're going to start to see the bulk of your tongue move toward the back of your mouth, starting low and going high. So if we think about it, we are high front to down, and then we are down back to high in the back. That's why the vowel valley looks the way it does. High in the front, moving down to the front. Now we're in the front, kind of in the middle down, and we're going to be moving back to the back of the mouth, but we're going to go high again. So we're low and open, low and back to high and back. And our lips get very, very rounded. To help create that sound with our tongue being so high in the back, we have to help it out with our lips being a lot more rounded. This one we can make a lot more smiley because our tongue's already up there and we don't have to help it out. It's already up there smiley, so we have our smiley face. Now, things like the ow and the oi, you've got movement through that as one continuous sound that is so articulated together that it's not separate. Think about oi, oi. So we're going to start here. Oi, all the way up there. Whew, that was some fast movement. Oi, and you didn't necessarily pass through all of the sounds. It was oi. And then you have ow. So we're going to go ah. Here's ah. Ow. All the way over here. So you're starting here. Ow. You didn't necessarily pass through all the sounds, but you went from ow over there. That makes it a unique sound, its own phoneme. Then we have the schwa, who kind of stands alone. As we know, we love schwa. It does produce that sound that we have in cup and cover. So you're thinking about articulation is very much in the same place. The other option you have is this sound. A schwa can be a very slight I. The difference is that on that unaccented, your voice has dropped, so it alters the sound just a little bit, and so it does become its own sound because of your voice and tone dropping and how it alters that. Then, of course, you have your R controlled, and we know from what we learned about these liquids is that R is overpowering to that vowel sound, so it becomes its own unique. Now, there is some still debate about whether or not you still hear the O for or, and if O can still be its own phoneme, but it's so powerful that it's usually universally accepted as being its own phoneme. Okay, so let's take a look at some of our oddballs. Uh. Is our schwa in the unstressed or unaccented part of the word. And a fun thing to tell students is that it makes the vowels lazy. Go. Tonsil. Bacon. When you're looking for that unaccented syllable, ask yourself to call the dog. The part of the word that has the long part of calling the dog, that's going to help you find the accent. So if I say, excuse me, if my dog's name is Bacon, and I go, bacon, that bay is held out. That's our accented syllable. Kun is our unaccented syllable, and then that is not saying ah or oh. It says it has become lazy and turned into a schwa. So there's our lazy bacon, bacon. So our unaccented schwa is right there. Let's try that with camel. Ready? Camel. So cam is our accented syllable. That was the longest part. And then E became our lazy schwa. Camel. In tonsil, it's the I, tonsil. And if you notice, it's kind of an I-ul. It's like a combo. If you slow it down, tonsil, ill. It's almost like ill. Close, but it has that I with the It's kind of funny that way. Okay, let's look at those R controls. We talked a little bit about them. Now, the cool thing is when you're trying to decipher between that the E-I-R, E-R, or U-R, we often have IR in the middle of the word. ER can be in the middle, but very much occurs at the end as a suffix. And UR is mostly in the middle of the word. So that's why we like to tap into that ER as a suffix. You're going to find him the most often. So the other, I call these complicated R control vowels because sometimes they're debated whether or not, just like these others, you have almost an AE before you have the when you have air. But for students, it's so much controlled by that R. It's nice to have them have air as an R controlled and ear as an R controlled as well. Okay, moving on to our ow and our oi. We talked about how they glide through and they're moving from one sound on the valley to the next, and it's not necessarily passed through all. They're just gliding over so smoothly. So we've got oi. We've got oi is going to be in the middle of a syllable. And OY will be at the end of a syllable. This is why it's very important to think about words as syllables because saying it's just at the end of a word can be confusing. It's at the end of a syllable. Now we have ow again. We have ow at the end of a syllable because you have words like chowder, but it is still at the end of a syllable. And OU is in the beginning or the middle of a syllable. So there will be something after the ow in a syllable. If there was nothing after the ow sound in a syllable, then we're going to probably use OW. Okay? So those kind of spelling rules are things we're going to be talking about a lot in chapter 4. And that should help you to get some idea of where to bring that attention up. Now, taking a look at our spelling errors in exercise 10. If the target word was path and the student spelled PAF, they're using a voiceless fricative for a voiceless fricative th. Now, these are both fricatives, so their manner of articulation has been confused. These are made in two different places. Take a look at those more in depth. I'll do a couple more, but then if you have questions about what that means and where the intervention can occur, please talk to me about this. This can be part of our conversations when we meet for coaching time. So let's take a look at, let's do plan and pran. Here they're substituting that R and that L sound. Again, it's that manner of articulation. L is more forward, R is further back. They do have the right mode or the right type of sound, so that's helpful. Some of these others, let's look at much. They have much and mush. This one, they are confusing those types of sound. They need to understand the fricative has that friction. So does the affricative, but we're going to have a stop. They need to go back and listen for where it stops. All right, let's go on to exercise 3. When we look about where to organize those words and where they go together. Oh, I didn't do the answer key for that one. Sorry, guys. Let's look at that one again. So if I want cease, where would I put that? In the E. What about peace? Yep, that has the E. Jim. And so you can see how I've listed them together, Jim and his. Again, look at those over. The biggest struggles were with the ah, as in bought, and walk, because that is often confused with the ah, as in, I gotta find out where I put it up here. Right here, odd and palm. Think of the difference between where the bulk of the sound is made. This ah is really forward in your mouth. Your tongue and stuff are forward, and the sound is really focused in the front of your mouth. This ah is in the back. Your jaw drops a little bit, your tongue pulls back a little bit, and it's a lot more resonating in closer to the back of your mouth. So take a look at that and practice that. If you have questions, let me know. Here's some more practice with that student spelling, but looking at it from the vowel viewpoint. We've got foot was our target word, and they spelled it F-O-T-E. The confusion is this and the reasoning for the O here. So you have foot, the confusion of your backgrounded vowels. Down here you have pin. You have confusion between that and that I. Knowing that slight difference between where your tongue has dropped here and it's higher with I. Let's see. We have hug written as hog. Again, you have your ah, right, and your Those are very close. It's very common they could make that mistake, very understandable. So we go back about where to move the tongue back. Where should the tongue be? Okay, that is it for chapter 2. I'm going to create a separate video to go into the first part of chapter 3, and that you guys can watch that. So this is another good stopping point if you need to kind of stop. Then take a break right here, take a stop, and come back and watch the rest of it and see the part of chapter 3. Let me get this switched over. Why? You guys are stopping or starting. Okay, so welcome back if you took a break. If not, then I'm glad you stuck with me. So we're only going to cover one piece of chapter 3, and we're going to look at syllables. There's a lot of goals for chapter 3, and we do get to meet one more time, so you guys will have a chance to learn the rest of those and get some more information. But let's dive into syllables. And syllables, we're looking at syllable structure and the patterns and stress patterns in syllables. So there's a couple things we want to be aware of. We know that the syllable is a unit of speech organized all around the vowel. You cannot have a syllable without a vowel sound. That syllable vowel sound may be different than the ones written as the ones that we speak. Perfect example is representative. In the dictionary, if you were to see the syllable breaks written, it would be re-pre-sent-ative. But that is not how we say it. We say it as re-sent-ative. And that can be often confusing for students. It is all based, again, where we have the vowel sound and where the written is based on a set of pattern or letter rules. It's all revolved around what letters are being used. Now, we've tried to do everything this year based from the foundation of speech. So when those differences occur, when the speech syllable is different than where the syllable break is, acknowledge the speech syllable break, and then talk about the letter pattern. This is why it's so important to teach not only the spoken syllable identification and practice that way, but give them a basis to attach then the letter syllable rules and teach them those patterns of VCV words or VCC words and split between the two consonants in the middle. So the number of syllables will match the vowel sound. We've got to emphasize the sound syllables just because it'll tell us the number of syllables and it's going to help us know the rules behind what vowels are going to say depending on those syllable breaks. They really do work in tandem. The written rules and the speaking rules really work in tandem with each other. We know that the vowel sound is the peak of each syllable. There is some debate over whether they should include liquids and nasals as being part of the peak, but let's stick with the pure vowel at this point. From our discussion earlier, it's because those liquids and nasals do carry the vowel so very much. For students, the purposes of teaching students, maybe advanced levels could handle this idea of peak. Stick with the vowel instead of including the L's and the R's, mostly because it's right now at their level, it's not going to make a difference. For you guys, though, it's helpful to know that if you have a liquid and a nasal, and it's right by the peak of the syllables, right by the vowel, this would be why you're going to see students flipping that around in their spelling. So if the word is cold and they spell clawed, that's because it's a liquid and we know it carries and it is very much connected to the peak or the vowel sound. And so they predominantly hear that and they think about, oh, well, that's what I hear. It must be first. Still realizing they need a vowel there. So you see that happen with the R's and the L's. A good way to fix that is to bring their attention back to their articulation and say, when we say the word cold, watch your mouth. You have k, O. You actually form your mouth is in the shape of the O first, and then it goes to the O. Now, same thing with girl. When you say girl, you're actually going to have that R controlled piece of going that really, really bossed out into the So again, that one's a lot more tricky. That's why we teach that as a unit, right? We have to teach them explicitly the pattern for that particular example. All right, so this is sort of some of the information, some of the terminology used in the chapter is that we know the onset is anything before the vowel, the first vowel. So like TR for trust, that's the onset. We're pretty familiar with that one. Rhyme is going to be a vowel and everything else after it. Now, at this point, we're going to take a closer look at the rhyme and we're going to look at the coda. The coda is within the rhyme itself and it's everything after the vowel in that syllable. So if the U is the peak, then that ST is the coda. Both the peak and the coda make the rhyme. So for our purposes, for students, it is helpful for them to know the onset and the rhyme. But there's really not a lot of reason why they need to worry about the coda and the peak. But for you to improve your ability to analyze what things are happening, it's good for you to know that what the coda and the peak is. Now we know that syllables don't have to have an onset. They can start with the rhyme, but they always have to have a rhyme because the rhyme is everything else with the vowel. Unless you have just the vowel, but then again, just a vowel like A or I, it's also the rhyme. So it's kind of funny. All right. Now, how do we teach this, right? How do we get to our kids to get this understanding of these parts, these pieces that we've broken into vowel sounds and what they are? There's a lot of really fun resources to introduce the idea of syllables. Take a chance when you guys get the slideshow to go look at those videos with Silly Bull and this great red dot. He cracks me up. This is a great way to introduce the idea of word parts and that we're splitting them up into their vowel sounds. There's some good instruction there. And then your next step is to move into those written patterns. Now, if you guys would like to dive a little deeper into your knowledge of syllables, this video on YouTube by the Reading League has a professor that, or researcher, that does a really good job of going more in depth. It's about a 45-minute long video, but she talks about syllables and the parts and really kind of gives a good, clear description of those. Now we're going to finish up with this idea of the syllable structure and those patterns that we see. These ones that we should teach about, okay, we're going to break it here after the vowel and it's going to be a long sound, or we're going to break it after the consonant, it's going to be a short sound. Something to keep in mind is when you're looking at those is that common mistakes in those programs is, or phonics programs, is that they will base it completely off of letter and not include the phoneme for those syllables. They'll say, hey, look for this letter pattern or look for a word part, especially in first grade. If you do both, you're going to have stronger students focusing on the phoneme and the letter rules. Also be aware that within these syllables, you will have consonant clusters that will be hard to segment because they are so closely stuck together in articulation. We kind of referred back to that previously when we talked about how stops go right into it and how they like to blend really close. And then if you notice that students are saying a word right, either adding sounds in or taking sounds out, it's because they are weak on that basic awareness of phonemes and how each individual phoneme is created and works separately and then articulates with its partner. So I'd love to talk to you guys later about what those mean to you. What does that make you think of in your instruction and things that you do? All right, last little piece we're going to do. I know this video is super long. Last little piece we're going to do is to stress or not to stress. That is the question. So let's talk about those stressed syllables, those unstressed syllables, and our good friend, the schwa. We love schwa. He's fun. First of all, in English, we have intonation that can do several things. We have two tones we typically use. We either speak a little high or we speak a little low. And those changes in intonation can determine the meaning of a word and the phrase. It can change a whole bunch depending on where you put that high or that low. For example, we usually put our stress in our sentences on nouns and verbs and drop off a little bit on articles and other words that are just connecting. Some of our prepositions we drop off a little bit, like on. I walked on the mat, things like that. If you add an intonation toward the end, you are now going to sound like a question. If you have if you drop off the intonation and go down at the end, you're going to be a statement. Sometimes you're going to be a command, depending on how far you drop that tone. You will most often put your high stress or your high tone on the first syllable of words. Things like apple, carrot, dolphin. If you listen carefully, my voice is slightly higher. I have a slightly higher tone on the first syllables of those words, and then I drop. My tone drops to a lower level on the second syllable. There's a difference in banana. With banana, I have my in a different spot where my voice drops a little bit. So I'll say those again. I'll go a little slower so you can try to hear where my voice drops. Apple, carrot, dolphin. And then with something where my tone is lower, like ago, under, my voice rose a little bit on the second syllable. Now we will have intonations where we might drop in the middle, like definition, definition, I rose, or you can drop in different places too, like archipelago, archipelago. So pel, I dropped. That unstressed syllable where your voice drops and it goes lower, that is where you will find your good friend Mr. Schwa. This is where our vowels get lazy and turn more into a very kind of or just an So as we said before, it's easy to find it when you call the dog and you think bacon. So if you think about bacon, if you call the dog, that bay that's longer is also higher, and that kun is lower and shorter, and that's where you'll find your schwa. Now, fun activity is take a chance to look at where do you think the primary stress is and how does that change the word. So here I have some words. Take a look at where the stress is located and how would that word change its meaning if I moved the stress? Or how would it sound incorrect if the stress moved, especially like buffet? All right. we're going to go ahead and stop there. Sorry, boys and girls. That is our sorry, teachers. I got in teacher mode. Sorry about that. That is the end of where we'll stop in chapter 3, and then we'll go back to some of these other pieces the next time we meet. So I hope you understood a lot. Please ask me questions. Let's continue these conversations on an individual level at our coaching meeting times and just continue to learn.